Some mysteries should remain buried. But what if the past refuses to be forgotten? 40 years ago, an entire ballet class of 6-year-old girls, along with their elderly instructor, vanished without a trace. No explanation, no evidence, just silence. Emily Carter, a woman haunted by illness and grief, never stopped searching for her daughter, Lily, who was among the missing. But just when she had learned to live with the unbearable loss, a letter arrives, one that shouldn't exist. Inside, an old key engraved with the name of the missing ballet class. How is this possible? Who sent it? And why now? As Emily follows the trail, she realizes that nothing in her life is what it seemed. Hidden secrets, long-buried betrayals, and a reality she never questioned begin to unravel before her eyes. What happened that night? And if the girls are still out there, what has kept them hidden for so long? Don't blink. Don't turn away. You won't want to miss a single second of this story. If you're ready for a journey filled with mystery, heartbreak, and shocking twists, subscribe now and tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? The world had long since moved on, but Emily Carter never did. It had been 40 years since the night her daughter, Lily, vanished along with her entire ballet class. 40 years of searching, of hoping, of waking up in cold sweats from dreams that weren't quite dreams. Her body had grown frail, illness taking its toll, but grief was heavier than any sickness. She had spent decades trying to fill the silence with explanations that never came. And then, when she least expected it, the past came knocking. The letter arrived on a cold evening in late November. It was ordinary at first glance, a simple white envelope with no return address, left on her doorstep as if the wind had carried it there. Emily hesitated before picking it up. Something about it sent a shiver through her, a deep, unshakable feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. She brought it into the dim light of her kitchen, hands trembling as she slid her fingers under the seal. Inside, there was only a single object, a key. It was old, rusted, and worn by time, but the engraving on its handle was unmistakable: Elysian, the name of the ballet class Lily had belonged to. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The key clattered against the table as she dropped it, her vision blurring as memories came rushing back all at once. The little pink tutu, the soft smell of hairspray in her daughter's golden curls, the way Lily had twirled in front of the mirror, giggling, whispering, "I want to dance forever, Mommy," and then gone. Just like that, a wave of nausea hit her. Emily gripped the edge of the table, forcing herself to breathe. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. The case had been closed decades ago with no answers, no traces. No one was looking anymore, no one but her. But the key was real, cold against her skin as she picked it up again. There was something else in the envelope, something she had missed. A note, scrawled in shaky, almost desperate handwriting. "You were there. You just don't remember." Emily's knees nearly buckled. Her hands clutched at the chair beside her, the room spinning. You were there? It wasn't possible. She had never set foot inside that studio the night of the disappearance. She had dropped Lily off like any other day. She had kissed her forehead, told her to be good, and walked away. That was the last time she saw her daughter, wasn't it? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Loud, insistent. Emily's heart jumped, her breath shallow as she turned towards the entrance. Her house was quiet, empty. No one visited her anymore. Not since she stopped returning calls, stopped attending family gatherings. She reached for the doorknob hesitantly, her fingers brushing against the cool metal before she pulled it open. Margaret stood on the porch. Emily's younger sister had aged, but her sharp eyes remained unchanged, piercing through the darkness. It had been years since they last spoke. Years of silence, of bitterness neither of them had been willing to break. Margaret stepped forward, hesitating before she spoke. "I had a dream," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was about Lily." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you talking about?" Margaret exhaled shakily. "I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to come here. I saw her and she was..." She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the envelope still clutched in Emily's hand. Her face paled. "Where did you get that?" Emily swallowed hard. "Someone left it for me. Just now." Margaret took a slow step inside, her hands trembling as she reached for the key. "Emily," her voice wavered, "you shouldn't have opened it." Something about the way she said it, the quiet horror in her tone, sent another shudder through Emily. "What do you mean?" Margaret looked at her, her eyes filled with something Emily couldn't quite name. Regret, fear. "I should have told you years ago," she murmured, "but I was scared. She closed her eyes briefly, shaking her head. "You don't remember, do you?" Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. The letter's words echoed inside her head. "You were there." "No," she whispered. "I don't." Margaret took a deep breath. "Then I need to show you something." Emily hesitated. She had spent decades chasing ghosts, searching for answers that never came. But this time the past had come looking for her. She grabbed her coat and followed her sister into the night. The drive was silent. Margaret's hands gripped the wheel tightly, her jaw set as she navigated the dark roads. Emily stared out the window, her thoughts racing. She should have been afraid, but there was something else beneath the fear, something that felt dangerously close to hope. Margaret pulled up to a secluded field, the headlights casting long shadows against the overgrown grass. "This is where it used to be," she said softly. Emily's breath caught. The Elysian Ballet Studio, or at least where it should have been. But there was nothing here. No building. No sign it had ever existed. Just emptiness. Margaret stepped out first, leading Emily through the tall grass. "I came here the night it happened," she admitted. "I never told you because I didn't want to believe what I saw." Emily turned to her. "What do you mean?" Margaret swallowed hard. "I saw you." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "That's impossible." Margaret shook her head. "You were standing right there by the doors. I called your name, but you didn't answer. And then the lights inside flickered, and everything went silent. When I looked back, the building was gone. And so were you." Emily's hands trembled. "I don't remember that." Margaret hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket. "I found this that night," she whispered, pressing something into Emily's palm. It was a photograph, faded and torn at the edges, but unmistakable. A group of little girls in ballet costumes. The Elysian class. Emily's breath caught when she saw Lily standing in the front row, smiling brightly, but her stomach dropped when she saw the figure in the background. A woman, standing in the doorway watching. Emily's own face stared back at her from the photograph. She dropped it. Her chest tightened, a sharp pressure spreading through her ribs. "No," she whispered. "This doesn't make sense." Margaret placed a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, I think you were there that night, and I think something doesn't want you to remember." The wind howled through the field, cold and empty. The key in Emily's pocket grew heavier, and for the first time in 40 years, she realized she was no longer just looking for the truth. The truth had already found her. The night air was thick with silence, pressing down on Emily as she stared at the photograph in her trembling hands. The image of herself, standing in the doorway of the ballet studio on the night of the disappearance, sent a chill through her bones. It wasn't possible. She hadn't been there. She would have remembered. Wouldn't she? Margaret shifted uncomfortably beside her, glancing at the overgrown field where the studio once stood. "I kept this photo for 40 years, Em. I told myself I imagined it, that maybe it was some trick of the light. But I knew. I always knew." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "Knew what?" Margaret hesitated before speaking, as if saying the words out loud would make them real. "That whatever happened that night, you were part of it." Emily shook her head, a deep nausea twisting in her stomach. "That doesn't make sense. I dropped Lily off at practice. I went home. She paused. A sharp ringing filled her ears. The memory was there, just like she had always told herself, but suddenly it felt wrong, like something had been placed there carefully, precisely. She gripped the photograph tighter, her pulse pounding. I don't remember coming back here. I don't remember standing in that doorway. Margaret exhaled shakily. Then maybe it's time you start remembering. Emily glanced at the key in her pocket, feeling its weight pressing into her palm. The metal was cool, but the engraving Elysian seemed almost warm against her fingertips, as if it were alive. She turned her gaze back to the empty field, her breath coming in shallow gasps. If she had really been there that night, if she had really forgotten something so crucial, then there had to be a reason. Margaret placed a hand on her arm. There's someone who might be able to help. Emily's head snapped toward her. Who? Margaret hesitated. A woman named Evelyn Moore. She was the instructor for the Elysian class. Or at least, she was supposed to be. But she never gave an interview, never spoke to the press. It's like she vanished the same night the girls did. Emily frowned. So how do you know about her? Margaret's expression darkened. Because she's still alive. And she's been waiting for you. A cold dread settled into Emily's bones. The idea that someone had been waiting for her, as if they had always known this moment would come, made her stomach turn. Where is she? Margaret took a deep breath. She lives in a nursing home just outside of town. But there's something else you need to know before we go. Emily swallowed. What? Margaret hesitated before speaking, her voice low. She doesn't remember anything either. The drive to the nursing home was silent. Emily stared out the window, the darkness outside pressing against the glass like a living thing. The key in her pocket felt heavier with every passing mile, as if it knew she was getting closer to something she wasn't meant to find. When they arrived, the building was quiet, its halls dimly lit. The smell of antiseptic and thyme filled the air as Margaret led the way down a long corridor. Emily's breath quickened. She wasn't sure what she expected to find, but the thought of looking into the eyes of the one person who might hold the truth made her hands shake. They stopped at a door near the end of the hallway. Room 217. Margaret knocked gently before pushing it open. Evelyn. The woman sitting by the window was older now, her silver hair neatly pinned back, her frame thin and fragile. But when she turned, her eyes, pale blue and sharp despite her years, locked onto Emily's with startling intensity. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Evelyn whispered, "You came back." Emily's stomach clenched. You remember me?" Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "Not in the way you think." Margaret pulled up a chair beside her, her voice soft. "Evelyn, we need to understand what happened that night. The girls, the studio, everything." Evelyn let out a breath, her hands folding in her lap. "I've spent 40 years trying to remember," she murmured, "and even longer trying to forget." Emily's fingers tightened around the key in her pocket. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's eyes flickered to the window, her voice barely audible. "Do you ever feel like there's something just beyond your reach? Like you're missing a piece of yourself, but you don't know what it is?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. Evelyn turned back to her. "That's what it feels like. The night they disappeared. I was there, but I wasn't. I remember standing in front of the mirror in the studio. The girls were practicing. Everything was normal. And then, nothing." Margaret frowned. "Nothing?" Evelyn nodded slowly, like a cut in a film reel. "1 second, I was there. The next, gone. I woke up in my home with no memory of how I got there. I tried to tell people, but no one believed me. They said I abandoned my students, that I ran. But I swear to you, I never left that room." Emily's hands trembled. "Then where did you go?" Evelyn's gaze darkened. "I wish I knew." Margaret exhaled. "We found something, Evelyn." She reached into her bag and pulled out the photograph, placing it gently on the table. "Look at the background." Evelyn's fingers hovered over the image before she finally lifted it, her eyes scanning it slowly, and then she froze, her face drained of color, her lips parting slightly. She looked up at Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's you." Emily swallowed hard. "I don't remember being there." Evelyn stared at the photo, her breathing shallow. "That makes 2 of us." A long silence stretched between them. Then Evelyn did something Emily didn't expect. She reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "You need to be careful," she whispered, "because whatever took them hasn't let go of you either." Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Then why am I here? Why was I left behind? Evelyn's gaze darkened. That's the question, isn't it? Emily's grip tightened on the key in her pocket. It felt warmer now, pulsing against her skin like a heartbeat. Something inside her whispered that she was getting closer, that the answers were just beyond the veil of her own memory. But as she looked into Evelyn's weary eyes, another thought crept in. What if the truth wasn't something she wanted to remember? Emily couldn't sleep that night. The conversation with Evelyn played over and over in her mind, each word a thread unraveling a reality she wasn't sure she wanted to face. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the weight of the key pressing against her palm beneath the covers. It was as if it had fused with her skin, a tether to a past that had been hidden just beyond her reach. But why? What had really happened that night? The house was silent except for the rhythmic ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Margaret had insisted on staying over, worried about Emily's state of mind. But even with her presence, the walls of the house felt too thin, too fragile. Emily turned onto her side, trying to steady her breathing. She was exhausted, her body frail from years of illness. Yet something inside her was stirring awake, a part of her that had been dormant for decades. Somewhere in the distance, she heard a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a soft hum, like a distant melody carried on the wind. Emily's eyes snapped open. She sat up slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. It was impossible. The sound was familiar, hauntingly so. It was the tune from Lily's recital, the same one she had performed the night she vanished. Emily swung her legs over the side of the bed, her breath hitching as she strained to listen. The music wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the house. She hesitated before standing, the wooden floorboards cold beneath her bare feet. Margaret was asleep in the guest room, her soft snores barely audible through the walls. Emily clutched the key tightly as she stepped into the hallway, her pulse racing. The melody grew clearer with every step, leading her toward the study, the one room in the house she rarely entered anymore. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Moonlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows across the bookshelves and antique desk. The air smelled of old paper and dust, but beneath it lingered something else, something faintly floral, a scent she hadn't smelled in 40 years. Lily's perfume. Emily's throat tightened. The music was louder now, emanating from a small wooden box on the desk. Her late husband's old music box. She hadn't touched it in years, yet there it was, spinning slowly, playing a melody that should no longer exist. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. The moment her fingers brushed against the lid, the music stopped. Silence swallowed the room. Emily's breath came in ragged gasps. She opened the box with cautious fingers, expecting to find the tiny porcelain ballerina that had once twirled inside. But the figurine was gone. In its place was something far more unsettling. A photograph. She picked it up with unsteady hands, her eyes widening as she took in the image. It was another picture of the Elysian ballet class. But this one was different. The girls were all there, their expressions frozen in mid-dance. But the most chilling detail wasn't them. It was the reflection in the mirror behind them. It showed a group of people watching, parents presumably sitting in the audience. But one figure stood out, a woman in the far right corner, slightly blurred, her face turned toward the camera. Emily, her breath caught. Her own face stared back at her from the photograph. She looked younger, but not by much. Her hair was the same, her eyes, her dress. Emily gasped, dropping the photograph as she stepped back. She owned that dress now. It was hanging in her closet, but she had bought it only a few years ago. This picture should have been taken 40 years ago. A sickening realization settled in her stomach. The letter had said, "You were there. You just don't remember." Had she somehow been there? Not just that night, but recently? A chill ran down her spine as she stared at the photograph on the desk, her mind spinning. It wasn't possible. Couldn't be possible. She turned toward the door, ready to wake Margaret, to tell her everything. But then she heard it. A whisper. Soft, barely audible but unmistakable. "Mommy." Emily's breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. Her knees nearly buckled. The voice was small, familiar. Lily's. She turned sharply, her eyes darting across the room. Nothing. No one. Just the empty walls, the silent furniture, the dust settling in the moonlight. But the air had changed. The room felt different, like she wasn't alone. Emily swallowed hard. "Lily." Her voice cracked. Silence. Then another whisper, closer this time. "Hurry." Emily's chest tightened. It wasn't real. Couldn't be real. She had spent years waiting for something, anything, but this was impossible. And yet, she felt it. Something was coming. She grabbed the photograph from the desk, shoving it into her pocket before turning on her heel and rushing out of the study. She nearly crashed into Margaret, who had woken at the sound of her footsteps. Margaret frowned. "Emily? What?" "We need to go back." Emily interrupted, her voice urgent. "To Elysian." Margaret's expression darkened. "Emily, it's the middle of the night. You're shaking." "I heard her," Emily choked out. "Lily." "I heard her, Margaret." Margaret's face paled, her grip tightening on Emily's arm. "You need to slow down. You're exhausted." "I'm not imagining it." Emily's fingers dug into her sister's wrist. "Something's happening. Something I don't understand. But I need to. Please." Margaret hesitated, her face torn with uncertainty. Then, with a slow breath, she nodded. They left the house in silence, the old car rattling as Margaret drove through the empty streets. The city lights faded behind them, swallowed by the vast darkness of the countryside. The further they drove, the more Emily's anxiety grew, twisting in her chest like an unseen force. When they reached the field where the Elysian studio once stood, the night was eerily still. The wind had died. The air was thick with something heavy, something unseen. Emily stepped out of the car, her breath curling in the cold air. She reached into her pocket, fingers wrapping around the key. The moment she pulled it out, the wind returned, sharp, sudden, howling through the grass. Margaret stiffened. "Emily, look." Emily followed her sister's gaze. The gate, the rusted, abandoned gate that led to nowhere, was open. Emily's breath hitched. It had been locked for decades, an entrance to an empty lot, a place where a building had once stood. But now, standing beyond it, something flickered in the darkness. A shimmer, like a reflection in the air itself. It wasn't just an empty lot anymore. It was something else. "A door," Margaret whispered. "Are you seeing this?" Emily's grip tightened on the key. Her heart pounded. She took a step forward. And the moment her foot touched the other side of the gate, the world shifted. The air turned thick, pressing against her skin like water. The field flickered, dissolving like mist, and for a moment, she was standing somewhere else. Somewhere she recognized, but shouldn't. She was inside the studio. The mirrors lined the walls, reflecting an empty room bathed in pale light. The ballet bars stood untouched, dustless, as if time had never touched this place. And then, a figure, small, a little girl, Lily. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Lily stood across the room, her golden curls untouched by time, her small hands clasped in front of her, watching. Tears blurred Emily's vision. Her lips parted, her voice barely a whisper. "Lily." The little girl tilted her head. And then, in a voice so quiet it barely reached her, "Mommy, why did you leave me?" Emily's entire body froze. The words hit her with the force of a crashing wave, knocking the breath from her lungs. "Why did you leave me?" The voice was unmistakable, small, fragile, familiar in a way that made her chest tighten painfully. Her daughter stood just a few feet away, dressed exactly as she had been on the night she disappeared. Her delicate pink ballet dress untouched by time, her golden curls cascading over her shoulders. But her eyes held something deeper, something that sent a cold shiver down Emily's spine. Lily was waiting for an answer. Emily felt her lips part, but no sound came. Her throat constricted, emotions rising too fast, too violently. This wasn't possible, couldn't be real. And yet, the air around her crackled with something ancient, something that told her that reality was no longer what she thought it was. Margaret was beside her, but her voice sounded distant, like an echo through water. "Emily, we have to go." But Emily couldn't move. She couldn't blink. Lily's gaze never wavered. She tilted her head slightly, her small fingers twisting together. "You were supposed to come back for me." A sob caught in Emily's throat. Her voice broke. "Lily, I never." She took a step forward, and the moment her foot touched the polished wooden floor, the room shifted. The mirrors along the walls trembled, the air thickening, pressing against her skin. Emily gasped, gripping her chest as the world flickered like a dying film reel. Suddenly, she wasn't in the studio anymore. She was somewhere else. The walls had darkened, the once pristine ballet mirrors now covered in dust and streaked with age. The chandeliers above flickered weakly, their light dim, almost hesitant. The bars along the walls were warped, the wooden floor scratched as if worn down by years of movement. The studio was abandoned, decayed, and yet Lily remained untouched, perfect, frozen in time. Emily's breath hitched as panic clawed at her throat. She turned to Margaret, but her sister was gone. The door where they had entered had vanished. Emily was alone with her daughter. A tear slipped down her cheek. "Lily," she whispered, "I never left you. I never stopped looking for you." The little girl blinked. Her expression didn't change. "Then why didn't you come sooner?" Emily felt something crack inside her. She shook her head violently. I didn't know how. I didn't remember." Lily's fingers twitched at her sides. "You did remember." Emily's heart stopped. Lily took a slow step forward. "You were there, Mommy, the night we left." Emily's entire body tensed. "What?" A cold rush of air swept through the studio, the chandeliers swaying, the light flickering. Emily stumbled back, her mind reeling. "No, that's not true. I dropped you off at practice. I went home. The memory surfaced like something rising from the depths of water. Emily's breath caught. She had been there. She didn't remember how. She didn't remember why. But she had been inside the Elysian studio the night the girls disappeared. A sharp ringing filled her ears. The floor beneath her seemed to sway. Images flashed through her mind. Fleeting, blurred, like pieces of a dream she had long since forgotten. The studio, the music, the other children spinning in perfect unison. A door that should not have been there. And then, a voice. Not Lily's, not Evelyn's, someone else's. A whisper, low and commanding, curling around her thoughts like a serpent. Some doors should never be opened. Emily's head pounded. She stumbled, gripping the side of a dusty ballet bar to steady herself. "Lily, what happened that night?" Lily's small hands clenched into fists. The air around them seemed to pulse, growing denser, heavier. "You let them take us." Emily's vision blurred. No, that wasn't right. That wasn't true. Was it? She pressed a trembling hand to her temple, her pulse hammering against her skin. "Lily, I don't..." A sudden gust of wind tore through the studio, and for the briefest moment, Emily saw them. The other girls. They stood in the far corners of the room, their small figures draped in shadow, their ballet dresses eerily pristine. Their heads were bowed, their hands clasped in front of them, as if waiting, silent, motionless, watching. Emily's breath turned shallow. "Lily!" Her daughter took another step forward. The air crackled with energy. The chandeliers above flickered wildly. The mirrors along the walls trembled. Then Lily whispered something that sent a bolt of ice through Emily's veins. "They're waiting for you, too." A choked sob left Emily's lips. The walls seemed to close in. The air grew impossibly heavy. Her knees threatened to buckle. Lily tilted her head again, her expression unreadable. "You don't belong out there, Mommy." Emily's pulse pounded. "Lily!" A deafening crack echoed through the room. The mirrors shattered. A burst of cold air slammed into Emily's chest, knocking her backwards. Glass rained down around her, reflecting endless shards of her own panicked face. She gasped, scrambling to push herself up, but the ground beneath her twisted, shifting as if it were no longer solid. And then, a hand grabbed her wrist. Emily's head snapped up, her breath catching in her throat. Margaret. She was there, gripping Emily's arm with desperate force, her expression frantic. Emily, get up! The world around them trembled. The air shimmered, flickering between two realities. The decayed, abandoned studio and something else, something darker. The broken mirrors reflected images that weren't entirely their own. Margaret pulled hard, dragging Emily to her feet. We need to go. Now! Emily's mind spun, her body moving on instinct. She cast one last, desperate look toward Lily. Her daughter stood still, unmoving amidst the chaos. And then, just as Emily's vision blurred with tears, Lily smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was knowing. Then the studio collapsed. The world spun. The air turned thick and suffocating. Emily felt herself being pulled backward, her limbs weightless, her consciousness slipping. A final whisper curled through the darkness, the voice so faint she almost missed it. I'll see you soon, Mommy. And then, nothing. A deep, endless black swallowed her whole. Emily gasped as she shot upright, her lungs burning as if she had been drowning and had just surfaced for air. Cold sweat clung to her skin, her pulse erratic, her hands trembling violently. She wasn't in the studio anymore. She wasn't in Elysian. She was somewhere else. The world around her was spinning, disoriented, unsteady. The scent of damp earth filled her nostrils, the air thick and heavy. It took a moment for her vision to adjust, but when it did, she realized she was lying on the ground, dirt beneath her fingers, dried leaves scattered around her. The night sky stretched above her, the moon a pale silver disk barely peeking through the dense trees. She was in the forest. A sharp gasp to her right made her turn. Margaret was next to her, struggling to push herself up, her breath ragged, her hair wild and tangled. Her sister's face was pale, her eyes wide with panic. Emily? She croaked, her voice hoarse. What the hell just happened? Emily's heart pounded as she tried to piece it together. The mirrors, the voices, the way the studio had collapsed around them like it had never existed at all. I don't know, she whispered, gripping her head as the memory of Lily's face flashed before her. I'll see you soon, Mommy. Margaret clutched Emily's wrist, her grip ice cold. We need to leave. Now. Emily barely had the strength to nod. Every bone in her body ached. Her muscles felt heavy, as if she had been running for hours. She pushed herself onto shaky legs, Margaret doing the same beside her. The forest loomed around them, dark and endless, the trees stretching impossibly high. There was no sign of the road, no sign of the car, no sign of Elysian. Margaret's breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling too fast. That place, whatever it was, it's gone. She turned to Emily, her voice barely holding steady. Did you see her? Emily swallowed hard. Her throat felt raw. Yes. Margaret hesitated before whispering, was it really Lily? Emily wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe it. But something about her daughter, about the way she had spoken, the way she had smiled, didn't feel entirely right. It was Lily, but at the same time, it wasn't. She said I was there that night, Emily murmured, the words leaving her lips before she could stop them. That I let them take her. Margaret's face went rigid. Emily. She was right. Emily interrupted, her voice trembling. I don't remember how. I don't remember why. But I was there. And I left her behind. Margaret's hand tightened around hers, her grip grounding. You didn't leave her, Em. Someone made you forget. The thought sent a chill down Emily's spine. She clutched the key in her pocket, the cold metal pressing against her palm. Then why did they let me go? Margaret had no answer. The wind rustled through the trees, whispering like a voice just out of reach. Emily turned slowly, an unsettling feeling creeping up her spine. The forest stretched into endless darkness, the air unnervingly still. And yet, she felt like they were being watched. Margaret must have felt it too, because she tugged at Emily's arm. "We have to move." Emily nodded numbly, forcing her legs to work, to push forward. The dirt path beneath them was uneven, unfamiliar, but they didn't stop. They walked for what felt like hours, though time had become impossible to measure. Every step felt heavier, the weight of exhaustion dragging them down, but stopping wasn't an option. Then, finally, a break in the trees. The sight of the empty road made Emily's knees nearly give out. Margaret exhaled sharply beside her. Oh, thank God! Their car was still there, parked exactly where they had left it. They had no idea how they had ended up so deep in the woods. No idea how much time had passed. But none of it mattered now. Margaret fumbled for the keys with shaking hands. She barely got the door open before Emily collapsed into the passenger seat, her mind reeling. Margaret started the engine, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. "We're leaving," she said, more to herself than to Emily. "We're getting out of here. The radio crackled. Emily stiffened. Margaret's hand hovered over the dial, her fingers trembling. Static filled the car, thick and distorted, the sound grinding against Emily's skull. And then, a voice, small, familiar. "You're not supposed to be here, Mommy." Margaret slammed her hand against the dial, killing the sound instantly. Her face was deathly pale. Neither of them spoke. Emily gripped the dashboard, her breath shaking. "Drive." Margaret didn't need to be told twice. The tires screeched against the pavement as she sped down the road, the trees blurring past them. The further they got, the more the weight pressing against Emily's chest began to lift. But it never disappeared completely. She knew, deep down, that this wasn't over, that whatever door they had opened, it was still waiting for them. They didn't speak for the rest of the drive. The city lights eventually reappeared in the distance, flickering like a promise of safety. But Emily knew better. There was no safety, no answers, only more questions. By the time they pulled into her driveway, exhaustion had settled into every inch of Emily's body. But she didn't move. She sat in the car, staring at the key in her hand, the engraved word Elysian glinting faintly in the dim light. Margaret turned to her, her voice quiet. "What do we do now?" Emily closed her fingers around the key. "We find out the truth." Margaret exhaled, nodding. Neither of them had a choice anymore. Emily stepped out of the car, the cold night air pressing against her skin. She climbed the porch steps slowly, her limbs feeling heavier with each movement. She just needed sleep, just a few hours to process everything. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. And then, she froze. Something was wrong. The air inside the house was different. Still, silent. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she took a slow step forward. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, the darkness pressing in from all sides. And then she saw it. A single object placed in the center of the kitchen table. A ballet slipper. Pink, small, pristine. Emily's hands shook as she reached for it, her fingertips brushing against the soft fabric. The moment she touched it, a whisper curled through the air, soft, barely audible, but enough to make her blood run cold. "I told you I'd see you soon, Mommy." Emily dropped the slipper. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her vision blurring at the edges. This wasn't over. It had never been over. And Lily was coming home. Emily stood frozen, her fingers trembling as she stared at the small pink ballet slipper resting on the kitchen table. It was impossible. She hadn't seen the slipper in 40 years. It should have been lost just like Lily. And yet, here it was, as if time had never touched it, as if someone or something had placed it there deliberately. Margaret stepped into the house behind her, her breath hitching the moment her eyes landed on the slipper. "Emily," she whispered, "where did that come from?" Emily shook her head, her heart hammering in her chest. "It wasn't here before." Margaret swallowed hard, her face pale. "Someone's been in the house." A shiver ran down Emily's spine. The silence pressing against the walls was suffocating, thick with an unseen presence. She could feel it, the same sensation she had felt in the studio. Like something unseen was just beyond her reach, watching, waiting. Her fingers twitched at her side, itching to reach for the key in her pocket. But before she could react, a sudden sound made her entire body stiffen. A faint creak from upstairs. Margaret's breath caught. Emily. Emily's mind raced. She had locked the house before they left. No windows were open. No one else had a key. And yet, someone was upstairs. Or something. Margaret reached for her arm, her grip firm. We should leave. But Emily didn't move. She couldn't. There was something unnatural about the air around them. Something that made her legs feel like they were made of stone. She was rooted in place, paralyzed between fear and an aching, unbearable need for answers. Then, another sound. Soft, delicate, the faintest whisper of footsteps. Emily's heart pounded. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locked onto the staircase leading to the second floor. The shadows at the top stretched long and deep, shifting slightly in the dim light. And then, a shadow moved, a small figure. Emily's breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. A child. Margaret's grip on her wrist tightened. Emily, we have to go. Now. But Emily didn't move. She took a step forward. Then another. The air in the house seemed to pulse, the walls breathing, the floorboards stretching beneath her feet. And then the voice came. Small. Familiar. Heartbreakingly clear. Mommy. Emily stopped. A sob caught in her throat. Lily. The voice was coming from upstairs. Margaret yanked her back, panic flashing in her eyes. Emily, don't. But it was too late. Emily was already moving, her feet carrying her forward before she could stop them. She climbed the stairs one by one, her breath shallow, her pulse a relentless drum in her ears. The hallway at the top was dim, the single overhead light flickering slightly. The air was thick, heavy with something unseen, something ancient. And then she saw it. A door. Her bedroom door, slightly ajar. Emily hesitated. She knew, somewhere deep inside her, that whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't supposed to be here. But she had come too far. She had to see. With a shaking hand, she reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold beneath her fingertips. She hesitated for only a moment before pushing it open. The room was dark, but in the center of it, bathed in the faint silver glow of the moonlight filtering through the window, stood Lily. Emily's breath caught. She looked exactly the same, not a day older than the last time Emily had seen her. Her delicate ballet dress was still pristine, her golden curls cascading over her shoulders. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Lily!" Her daughter blinked, slowly, too slowly. Then she smiled. Not a warm, relieved smile, but something else, something knowing. Emily took a step closer. "Lily, is it really you?" Her voice trembled, thick with hope and fear. Lily didn't answer. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her smile unwavering. Then she whispered, "I waited for you." Emily's chest tightened. She swallowed hard. "I know, baby. I know. I'm so sorry." She took another step. Lily blinked again, her eyes unreadable. Then, softly, she said, "No, Mommy." Emily froze. Lily's expression didn't change. "You didn't wait for me." The room shifted. The walls rippled like water, the shadows stretching unnaturally. The air turned thick, suffocating, pressing against Emily's skin. And then the mirror moved. Emily gasped. It was no longer reflecting the room as it should. Instead, it showed something else. A ballet studio, old, decayed, and inside it, the girls. They stood in perfect formation, their small hands clasped in front of them, their eyes blank, waiting. Emily's pulse thundered. The walls around her flickered, like two realities were bleeding into one another. And then she saw herself, in the mirror. But it wasn't her. It was her younger self, standing in that same studio, watching the children. And behind her, a door she had opened, a door that had never been meant to be opened. Emily stumbled back, her breath ragged. The memory came crashing down all at once. overwhelming, suffocating. She had been there that night. She had done something. And then, the Lily in the mirror turned and whispered, "You're remembering now, aren't you?" Emily's knees nearly gave out. Margaret's voice rang from downstairs. Panicked. "Emily, get out of there." Emily snapped out of it. She turned, heart hammering, and bolted toward the door. The air warped, the walls twisting around her, the entire house shifting. And just before she crossed the threshold, a hand grabbed her wrist. Small, cold. Emily turned and looked into Lily's eyes. For the briefest moment, she felt her daughter's fingers tighten, holding on to her as if she would never let go. Then, the world snapped back. Emily collapsed onto the staircase, gasping for breath. The house was still, normal. The slipper was gone. The mirror was whole. Margaret grabbed her shoulders. "Emily, what happened?" Emily's lips trembled. Her chest ached. "She's here," she whispered. "She never left." Margaret's face went pale. "What?" Emily swallowed hard, her fingers digging into the fabric of her dress. "Lily's not trapped." Her voice broke. "She's keeping me here." Emily's chest heaved as the weight of her own words settled over her. "She's keeping me here." The realization was suffocating, pressing against her ribs like an unseen force. She clutched her arms tightly around herself, her fingers digging into her sleeves as if grounding herself in the present would keep the past from swallowing her whole. Margaret knelt beside her on the staircase, her eyes scanning Emily's face with growing concern. "Emily, listen to me," she said, her voice firm yet gentle. "We need to get out of this house. Right now." Emily barely heard her. Her mind was still trapped in the moment upstairs. The reflection in the mirror, the decayed studio, the children watching, Lily watching. She shuddered at the memory of her daughter's cold fingers wrapped around her wrist. There had been no warmth, no life in that grip. Only something ancient. Margaret grabbed her hands. "Emily," she repeated, more forcefully this time. "Look at me." Emily blinked, finally meeting her sister's gaze. Margaret swallowed, her grip tightening. "We need help." Emily let out a hollow laugh. "From who?" Margaret hesitated, then exhaled. "Evelyn." Emily stiffened at the name. The ballet instructor, the woman who had been there the night everything changed, the woman who had been waiting for her. Emily didn't want to see her. She didn't want to hear whatever Evelyn had to say, because deep down she already knew. She had been part of this. She had done something, and Lily had never forgiven her. Still, Margaret was right. They couldn't do this alone. Emily let out a slow, shaky breath and nodded. Margaret wasted no time. She grabbed her keys, hauling Emily to her feet as they rushed out of the house. The air outside was cold, sharp against Emily's skin, but she welcomed it. Anything was better than the suffocating stillness inside. The drive to the nursing home was silent. Margaret's knuckles were white against the steering wheel, her jaw set, her mind no doubt racing with thoughts she wasn't ready to voice. Emily, on the other hand, could only stare blankly at the road ahead, the lights of the city blurring past her window. The moment they arrived, Margaret threw the car into park and hurried toward the entrance, Emily trailing behind. The receptionist barely had time to glance up before Margaret demanded to see Evelyn. Something in her urgency must have convinced the woman not to ask questions. A few moments later, they were led down a quiet hallway, stopping in front of a simple wooden door. Margaret knocked. No response. She knocked again, more insistently this time. Still nothing. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. She reached for the doorknob, hesitating only for a second before twisting it open. The door creaked softly as it swung inward. The room was empty. Emily's breath caught. The bed was neatly made. The chair by the window was untouched. But something felt off. Margaret stepped inside cautiously. "Where is she?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know." She moved further into the room, her gaze scanning for any sign of Evelyn's whereabouts. That's when she saw it. On the nightstand, a single letter. Emily's fingers trembled as she reached for it, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The envelope was unmarked, but as she turned it over, Her breath hitched. It was addressed to her. Margaret was at her side in an instant. "Emily, what is that?" Emily swallowed hard and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. "Emily, I knew you would come. I'm sorry I couldn't wait. I didn't have a choice. There are things you don't remember, things that were taken from you. But the past doesn't disappear just because we forget it. It lingers, and now it's coming back for you. You opened a door that night, a door that was never meant to be opened. And once it was, there was no way to close it. I tried to warn you. I tried to protect you. But I failed. Lily isn't the one who's trapped. You are. You always have been. Find the truth before it finds you. Evelyn." Emily's hands shook as she lowered the letter. Margaret was staring at her, her face pale. "What does that mean?" Emily felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. "I don't know, but that was a lie. Because a memory, a buried, broken memory was surfacing. The night of the recital. The last night she saw Lily. And the door. She had been there. She had opened it. And now, 40 years later, it was opening again." Margaret grabbed her arm. "Emily, we need to go. Now." Emily barely had time to react before the overhead lights flickered. A sudden, unnatural chill filled the air. The window in the room froze over, ice crawling across the glass in delicate patterns. Margaret took a sharp step back. "Emily." Emily turned just in time to see the mirror on the wall shift. Not like glass, like water. And in the reflection, Lily stood there, watching, waiting, smiling. Emily's breath left her in a silent gasp. Then, the mirror cracked. The room plunged into darkness. And the last thing Emily heard was her daughter's voice whispering, "Mommy, it's almost time." The darkness swallowed everything. Emily's breath came in sharp gasps, her hands fumbling for anything solid, anything to ground her. But there was nothing. Just an endless void stretching in every direction. The last thing she had seen was Lily's reflection in the mirror. Smiling, waiting. Then the world had snapped apart. A sharp, ice-cold pressure wrapped around Emily's wrist, and she jolted, instinctively pulling back. But the grip tightened. Small fingers, delicate, unrelenting. "Mommy!" Emily choked on her breath. The word echoed through the emptiness. A soft whisper curling around her like a thread, weaving through her thoughts, pulling at something deep inside her. The air was thick, suffocating, pressing against her skin like an unseen force. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears. Then light. It started faintly, a flickering glow in the distance, pulsing like a dying star. Then it grew, stretching, unfurling until Emily realized. It wasn't light. It was a room. The ballet studio. Emily gasped as the darkness around her peeled away like layers of old wallpaper, revealing the familiar wooden floors, the long mirrors lining the walls, the scent of rosin and faded memories. It was exactly as she remembered it. Pristine, frozen in time, and standing in the center, Lily. Emily's breath hitched. Her daughter looked the same as she had 40 years ago. Her small hands were clasped in front of her, her pink ballet dress untouched by time, her golden curls shimmering under the dim glow of the chandeliers. But something was wrong. The air around her seemed warped, like a mirage shifting under heat. Her eyes, so familiar, so heartbreakingly Lily, held something deep, something unreadable. Emily took a step forward. "Lily!" Lily blinked. The room shuddered. The chandeliers flickered. The mirrors rippled. Emily froze. Something in the air shifted. A whisper curled through the space between them, low, faint, ancient. Then Lily spoke. "You're almost ready to remember." Emily's heart stopped. A sharp ringing filled her ears. She shook her head, taking another step forward. "Lily, I don't—" "You open the door, Mommy." Emily's stomach dropped. The air twisted. The studio trembled. The mirrors lining the walls warped, their reflections stretching, bending, shifting. The room pulsed like a living thing. Emily pressed a hand to her temple. The memory, the one buried deep, the one she had spent a lifetime running from, was clawing its way to the surface. The recital. The last time she saw Lily. And the door. The one she had opened. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice raw. "Why can't I remember?" Lily tilted her head. Then she raised her hand, and the mirrors shattered. A deafening crash rang through the studio, and Emily fell. Not backward, not forward, but somewhere in between. Falling, falling, falling into the past. The air snapped. Emily gasped as she hit the floor. The breath knocked from her lungs. She coughed, disoriented, her vision spinning. The scent of something familiar, perfume, hairspray, the faintest hint of dust, filled her nostrils. Slowly, she lifted her head, and the moment she did, her blood ran cold. She was back in Elysian. Not the decayed, abandoned version. Not the echo of it. The real one. Emily's breath came in short, frantic gasps. The studio was alive around her. The chandeliers gleamed. The walls were pristine. The floors polished. And in the center of the room, the ballet girls, all 12 of them, they stood in formation, their small bodies poised, their faces turned forward. Their hands were clasped, their expressions unreadable. Emily's stomach twisted violently. She knew this moment. She had been here before. A shadow moved at the edge of the room. Emily's breath caught. A woman stood by the mirrors, her back straight, her hands folded. Evelyn, younger, before the years had worn her down, before she had disappeared into nothing. And then, a door that shouldn't exist. Emily's entire body locked. It was there, tucked into the farthest corner of the studio. A door she had never noticed before. A door that wasn't supposed to be there, but it was. Emily's chest ached. The weight of recognition crashed over her like a tidal wave, because she knew what happened next. She had seen it before. She had lived it before. The door would open, and the girls would vanish. Emily staggered to her feet. No, but she wasn't in control. She was watching herself younger standing across the room. Watching as her younger self took a slow step forward, toward the door. Emily screamed, "No, don't." But her younger self didn't hear her. The door creaked. The air hummed. The girls turned. Their faces were calm, expressionless, waiting. Emily sprinted forward, reaching, trying to stop herself. But the moment she touched her own arm, the world fractured. A searing pain split through her skull. Memories, flooding, rushing, overwhelming. And then, everything snapped back. Emily gasped, her body slamming against something solid. She was back in the present. Back in the empty house. Margaret was shaking her. "Emily, what happened?" Emily's vision blurred with tears. She remembered. She had opened the door. Not by accident. Not by mistake. She had opened it because she was told to. And now it was happening again. She clutched Margaret's arm, her entire body trembling. "We have to go back," she choked out. "Right now." Margaret's eyes widened in horror. "Go back? Emily, you're not making sense." Emily grabbed her sister's hands, her voice shaking. "I remember now," she whispered. "I know what I did. I know why I forgot." She took a ragged breath. "And I know what Lily is." Margaret froze. "What are you saying?" Emily's lips trembled. "She's not trapped," she whispered. A long silence stretched between them. Then Emily's voice broke. "She's keeping the door open." Margaret's face drained of color. The air shifted, and from upstairs, a soft laugh. Small, familiar, waiting. Emily's breath came in short, panicked gasps as the realization settled deep into her bones. Lily wasn't trapped. She was keeping the door open. The thought sent a sharp wave of nausea through her. She had spent 40 years searching for her daughter, aching for answers, hoping, praying, that Lily had been taken against her will, that she had been a victim of something larger, something beyond her control. But now she knew the truth. Lily had chosen to stay. Margaret was still gripping Emily's arm, her face pale, her chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths. "Emily," she whispered, voice trembling. What are you saying? Emily swallowed hard. Her hands felt like ice, her entire body stiff with the weight of the past crashing into her all at once. She's the one keeping it open, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. The door, the place. She shook her head, eyes burning. She's been waiting for me. Margaret took a step back. That doesn't make sense. She was only 6 years old when she disappeared. How could she? Time doesn't work the same way there. Emily cut in, gripping her sister's hands. Lily's been stuck between two places, but not because she's trapped. She hesitated, throat tightening. Because she chose to be. Margaret flinched as though Emily had struck her. Why? Emily's vision blurred with tears. She already knew the answer. Because Lily was waiting for her. Because Emily had left her behind. And now, after all these years, Lily had finally brought her back. A sharp, sudden noise made both women jump. A creak. Upstairs. Margaret's entire body tensed. Emily. Emily turned slowly, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it would crack through her ribs. The house was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums. The kind that made the air feel heavy, suffocating. Then another creak, a floorboard shifting. Emily's blood ran cold. It was coming from Lily's old bedroom. Margaret gripped her wrist. We have to go. Right now. But Emily didn't move. She was done running. She had spent 4 decades drowning in the weight of unanswered questions, trapped between grief and guilt, clawing for something, anything, to make sense of what had happened that night. She wasn't running anymore. Emily took a deep, shaky breath and started up the stairs. Margaret cursed under her breath, rushing after her. Emily, stop. She grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but Emily wrenched free. I have to see her, she whispered, her voice raw. Margaret's expression darkened. And what if it's not her? Emily froze. A shadow flickered at the top of the stairs. A small figure. Margaret sucked in a breath. Emily's stomach twisted. It was Lily. She stood at the end of the hallway, half hidden in the dim light, her little hands clasped in front of her, her curls spilling over her shoulders. The ballet dress she had worn that night was still flawless, untouched by time. Emily's heart clenched. Lily! The little girl blinked. Then she turned and walked into her bedroom. Emily swallowed hard, her pulse thrumming in her ears. She followed. Margaret grabbed her arm one last time. Emily, please. Emily didn't stop. She stepped into Lily's room. The air inside was wrong. Thick, heavy, frozen in time. Emily's breath caught as her eyes scanned the room. It was exactly the same as the day Lily had disappeared. The bed was still unmade, the stuffed animals still neatly arranged in the corner, the tiny ballet slippers still resting beside the dresser. But there was something else, something new, a mirror. It stood against the far wall, taller than Emily remembered, its glass smooth and untouched. But when she stepped closer, her reflection wasn't her own. Emily's entire body locked. The woman staring back at her was younger. Not her now, her then. The Emily from the night Lily disappeared. She gasped. The reflection did not. It simply watched. Emily's stomach twisted violently. The air around the mirror rippled, distorting like heat rising from pavement. And then, the reflection moved. Emily took a sharp step back. Her younger self lifted a hand, pressing it against the glass. And then, the door appeared. Emily's breath hitched. It was there, just like that night. A door that had never belonged. A door that should not exist. And Lily was standing beside it. She wasn't in the mirror anymore. She was behind Emily. Emily turned, her breath catching. But Lily was different. She wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't Lily anymore. Her face was older, her features twisted in sorrow. Her eyes held something dark, ancient. Lily whispered, "You left me." Emily's knees nearly gave out. "I didn't mean to," she choked out. "I didn't know." Lily's expression didn't change. "You opened the door, Mommy." The air shuddered. Emily clutched her chest, remembering everything all at once. She had been there that night. She had opened the door. She had seen what was on the other side. And she had left Lily there. By choice. A sob racked through her. "Lily, I'm so sorry." Lily's head tilted slightly. Then she said something that made Emily's blood run cold. "You can stay this time." The door behind her creaked open. The air shifted. Emily's vision blurred. Lily took a step closer, lifting a hand. Reaching for her. Emily felt the pull. The weight. The temptation. She could stay. She could fix what she had done. She could be with Lily again. Her fingers trembled, almost reaching back. And then, "Emily!" Margaret's voice shattered the moment. Emily gasped, the world snapping back into focus. The mirror flickered. Lily's eyes widened. Emily stumbled back, the spell breaking. And just as the door began to close, Emily reached forward and pulled Lily with her. A deafening snap rang through the air. The room collapsed. The mirror shattered. The house groaned. And then, everything went dark. Emily's breath hitched. Silence. Then, a small, warm hand in hers. Emily's eyes flew open. She was on the floor. Margaret was hovering over her, panic in her eyes. And beside her, Lily. A sob ripped through Emily's throat. Her daughter. Whole. Real. Here. Lily's small arms wrapped around her, her tiny body trembling. And for the first time in 40 years, she was warm. Emily clutched her tight. Tears streamed down her face. "It's okay," she whispered, rocking her. "It's okay, baby." Lily buried her face against Emily's shoulder. "I didn't think you'd come." Emily broke. "I'll always come," she whispered. "Always." And this time, she meant it. Emily clutched Lily against her chest, her body trembling as reality settled around her. It was over. The weight of 40 years of grief, regret, and unanswered questions crashed into her all at once, leaving her gasping, raw, unsteady. Lily, warm, solid, real, was in her arms. Not a shadow, not a whisper from another place. Her Lily. Margaret knelt beside them, her face pale, her breath uneven. "Emily," she whispered, voice thick with disbelief. Is she really?" Emily couldn't speak. She could only nod, pressing her lips against Lily's golden curls, inhaling the scent she had thought was lost forever. Lily sniffled against her shoulder. "I thought I'd never come back." Emily pulled back, framing Lily's small face between her hands. Tears streamed down the little girl's cheeks, her bright blue eyes filled with something Emily couldn't quite name. Relief, confusion, and exhaustion that didn't belong in a child's face. Emily swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I'm here now," she whispered. "I won't let you go again." Lily blinked up at her, studying her mother's face as if memorizing every detail. Then she whispered, "I waited so long." A fresh wave of grief surged through Emily. 40 years. For her, it had been a lifetime of sorrow. But for Lily, it had been something else entirely. Something worse. Margaret touched Emily's arm, her voice cautious. "We have to go." Emily looked around, her breath catching. The house felt different. The oppressive weight that had lingered for so long was gone. The air was lighter, easier to breathe, as if something had been lifted. She nodded, standing on shaky legs, still holding Lily's hand. "Let's go home." But the moment they stepped outside, the truth crashed down on Emily like a thunderclap. Lily was still 6 years old. Emily felt her breath stall, her fingers tightening around her daughter's. The wind stirred around them, rustling the trees, whispering through the night. Margaret must have realized it too, because she stopped abruptly, eyes darting between Emily and the little girl. Margaret's voice was careful. "Emily, how?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know." Lily looked up, her small fingers curling tighter around Emily's. "Time is different there," she murmured, her voice so soft it was almost lost in the wind. A chill ran down Emily's spine. Margaret inhaled sharply. "Emily, she hasn't aged." Emily already knew. She could feel it in her bones, in the unnatural stillness of Lily's body, in the way her fingers felt older even though they looked the same. Her daughter was here, but something was wrong. Margaret's voice wavered. Are we sure she's supposed to be here? Emily snapped. Don't say that. Her voice shook. She's my daughter. Margaret took a slow step back. I'm not saying she's not. I just... She hesitated, glancing at Lily. Emily, what if? Stop. Emily's voice was sharp, final. She wouldn't question this. Not now. Not after everything. She turned back to Lily, smoothing her hair. We're going home, sweetheart. Lily hesitated. Emily frowned. Lily. The little girl's lips parted, but no words came out. Then slowly, she looked back at the house. Emily followed her gaze, and the moment she did, her stomach dropped, because the house was changing. Right before her eyes, the walls flickered, shifting between two states, solid and something else. The edges blurred, the structure warping, dissolving, rebuilding itself. Emily's breath caught, and then a door appeared. Emily froze. It was the same door, the impossible door, standing tall and untouched, right where the front porch had been. Margaret backed away. Emily, she gasped. Something is. The door creaked. A sliver of darkness peeked from the other side. Lily let go of Emily's hand. Emily's heart stopped. Her daughter took one step toward it. Emily grabbed her wrist. No, she choked out. Lily, no. Lily turned slowly, and this time her eyes weren't the same. They were older, wiser, and so sad. Emily's breath turned shallow. Lily, you're home. You don't have to go back. Lily smiled, but it wasn't the soft, innocent smile of a 6-year-old girl. It was knowing. Lily reached up, brushing a tear from Emily's cheek. You don't understand, Mommy. Emily's throat tightened. Then help me understand. Lily inhaled deeply, glancing back at the door before looking up at Emily. And then she whispered, I'm the one who keeps it closed. Emily's entire body locked. No. Lily took another step. Emily clutched her shoulders, panicked. Lily, you can stay. You're home. But Lily shook her head. Tears welled in her bright blue eyes. Mommy, if I stay. The door shuddered, and Emily felt it. The pull, the weight, the space between worlds tearing open. Emily gasped. Her mind finally understood. Lily hadn't just been waiting. She had been holding something back, keeping something else from coming through. And now, without her there to stop it, the door would stay open forever. Emily's hands trembled. No, she whispered, shaking her head. We'll find another way. Lily smiled through her tears. There's no other way. Emily sobbed. I just got you back. Lily placed her tiny hand over her mother's. And I got to see you again. Emily's chest ached. Lily took a deep breath. Then, she stepped back. Emily lunged. No! But Margaret held her back. Emily screamed, struggling against her sister's grip, as Lily turned and stepped through the door. The moment she did, the world trembled. A gust of wind howled. The trees bent. The ground shook. The door slammed shut. And then, silence. Emily collapsed to her knees, sobbing. The house was gone. The door was gone. Lily was gone. Margaret knelt beside her, wrapping trembling arms around her sister. Emily's body shook violently, her fingers clawing at the dirt, desperate to pull Lily back. But she wasn't coming back. She had never been meant to. Emily had saved her daughter, but Lily had saved everyone else. The door was closed, and this time, it would stay that way. Emily lifted her head, tears blurring her vision. And for the briefest moment, she swore she saw Lily standing in the distance, smiling. And then, she was gone. Forever.